The following is a DW Ancient Egypt production. In the last episode, we discussed the first 4 pharaohs of the New Kingdom. We left off with the death of Thutmose II, who had placed his 2-year-old successor, Thutmose III, on the throne. Within 2 years of co-regency, the wife of Thutmose II and stepmother to Thutmose III began her policy to subvert his position. She placed key officials in high positions and began construction of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. The topics of this episode include Queen Hatshepsut's mortuary temple, Royal Steward Senenmut, Hatshepsut's first tomb, Tomb KV-20, and reign suppression. Hatshepsut was born in 1507 BC and is believed to have been the daughter of Thutmose I and his great royal wife, Ahmose. After her father's death, Hatshepsut was then married to Thutmose II, her half-brother and father's heir, when she was 14 or 15 years old. They were around the same age when they married. Upon the death of Thutmose II in 1479 BC, his young son, Thutmose III, became the pharaoh of Egypt. Hatshepsut initially served as regent, but eventually assumed the position of pharaoh alongside him by year 7 of his reign, in roughly 1472 BC, becoming queen regent. With this new position, Hatshepsut thus shared Thutmose III's existing regnal count, effectively backdating her accession as pharaoh to year 1, when she had been merely regent. Although Queens Sobeknefru and possibly Nitocris may have previously assumed the role of pharaoh, Hatshepsut was the only female ruler to do so in a time of prosperity, making her the most powerful female ruler up to this point in Egyptian history. Constructed under the supervision of her steward, Senenmut, Hatshepsut's temple took its basic inspiration from the 12th dynasty temple of Mentuhotep II, adjacent to the site on the south. When completed, it was unique to Egyptian architecture. As described by Peter Clayton, the temple was built largely of limestone. It rose in 3 broad, colonnade-fronted terraces to a central rock-cut sanctuary on the upper terrace. The primary dedication was to Amun, but there were also smaller shrines to Hathor and Anubis, respectively located on the south and north sides of the second terrace. A feature of the temple was its alignment to the east directly with the great temple of Amun across the Nile at Karnak. The site of her temple had originally been a small cave shrine to the goddess Hathor. Queen Hatshepsut legitimizes her rule through a propaganda relief on her temple known as the Birth Relief. This was located on the walls of the northern half of the middle terrace. It displays the god Amun, disguised as her father Thutmose I, who visits her mother. The results of this visit is that her mother is pregnant from Amun with Hatshepsut. The point of this depiction is that her father is really the god Amun. She is divine, just like the pharaohs. All pharaohs state that they are the son of Ra. She states the same thing, but in a different way. This relief also shows her with the false pharaonic beard. Something to note about this depiction on the wall of her mortuary temple is that the sculptures got it wrong. Usually, when the pharaoh tells his divine birth, they show the pharaoh and his soul, his Ka, being created on a potter's wheel. The myth is that the god Hanum, a ram-headed god who was the potter, creates everybody out of clay on a potter's wheel, very similar to Adam from the Old Testament of the Bible. Adam means clay in Hebrew. Hanum is always shown creating the Ka of the king and the king himself, 2 little doubles on a potter's wheel, and it's a standard scene. These sculptors worked to create this, but must have used a template because for Hatshepsut, they are both little boys. You can see that they are naked. They should have used little girls for Hatshepsut, but she must not have minded, for the scene remains, the standard birth scene as with all other pharaohs. On the upper terraces of Hatshepsut's temple at Deir el-Bahari, the central sanctuary was dedicated to the god Amun-Ra, whose principal place of worship was the Karnak temple. During a yearly festival called the Beautiful Feast of the Valley, the god's image was transported across the river to the west bank. Carrying Amun-Ra in his sacred bark, the festival procession followed a roadway lined with sphinxes that led to Hatshepsut's temple. On the middle terrace, the pathway was flanked by colossal kneeling statues that represented Hatshepsut as the ideal Egyptian king. Some of the statues were depicted wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. Images in which Hatshepsut adopts this masculine attire coincide with her increased claims to power and seem to have been one of several methods by which she sought to legitimize her rule. Unlike most representations of Hatshepsut as ruler, there is a statue that has a distinctly feminine air. In this life-size statue, Hatshepsut is shown wearing the Nim's headcloth while maintaining her feminine qualities. The kingly titles on the sides of the throne are feminized to read, "The Perfect Goddess, Lady of the Two Lands, and Bodily Daughter of Ra," a practice that was dropped later in her reign. Traces of blue pigment are visible in some of the hieroglyphs on the front of the statue, and a small fragment on the back of the head shows that the pleats of the Nim's headcloth were originally painted with alternating blue and yellow pigments. The inscription on another statue indicates that Hatshepsut was offering Amun Ma'at, translated as order, justice, or truth. By making this offering, Hatshepsut affirmed that Ma'at was the guiding principle of her reign. She wears the Nim's headcloth and the false beard that are part of the regalia of a king. With her title as King of Egypt no longer contested, Hatshepsut re-established the trade routes that had been disrupted during the Hyksos period, thereby building the wealth of the 18th dynasty. The most famous expedition, as recorded on the walls of her temple, was sent to the land of Punt, notably for frankincense and myrrh. The relief on the wall displays a realistic depiction of the queen of the land of Punt, Queen Ati. The delegation returned with 31 live myrrh trees, the roots of which were carefully kept in baskets for the duration of the visit. This was the first recorded attempt to transplant foreign trees which were planted in the courts of her mortuary temple complex. Hatshepsut was one of the most prolific builders in ancient Egypt, commissioning hundreds of construction projects throughout the country. At Karnak, she erected 2 twin red granite obelisks, which were, at the time, the tallest in the world. One still stands as the tallest surviving ancient obelisk, the other has broken in 2 and toppled. Their removal from the quarries at Aswan is recorded on the walls of her mortuary temple and is about the only scene we have of how they transported them. They were created at Aswan in 7 months, then placed on a barge, end to end, and towed by 27 ships, with 3 pilot ships leading until they were unloaded at Karnak. At the base of her obelisk, she called herself the Female Falcon. Remember that the falcon represented the pharaoh. Although she sometimes depicted herself as a male ruler, she was not masquerading as one. She was proud to be female, but definitely a female who ruled Egypt. Hatshepsut created the Red Chapel at Karnak. What is interesting is that she is shown side by side with Thutmose III. The meaning behind this is unknown. During her reign, Thutmose III is silent. Did she usurp the throne against his will? Did he ever wish to take the throne from her? Or did he feel comfortable with her in power? He was most likely away training in the army and could have possibly taken power any time, but the details are unknown. He would later strive to erase her name during his reign, but this would occur 20 years after her death. We'll discuss more about this at the end. Hatshepsut's closest advisor was her royal steward, Senenmut. Born as a commoner, his sudden rise in power would be controversial. He would hold numerous titles, including Chief Architect and Overseer of Works, Chief Steward of Amun, Overseer of the Granaries of Amun, of the Fields of Amun, of the Cattle of Amun, of the Gardens of Amun, of the Weavers of Amun, and others. His most important position was that he was the tutor of Hatshepsut's daughter, Nefer. It's sad to know that she would die from unknown causes as a teenager. Her death would, without question, devastate her mother. Senenmut was unrivaled in power, and only the chief priest of Amun could match him. It was rumored that he owed his privileged position to intimate relations with the queen. Evidence for an intimate relationship is considered when one looks at his sarcophagus. In his first tomb, there was a pink Aswan granite sarcophagus that was smashed to pieces. No piece was left bigger than a fist. However, after archaeologists reconstructed this, they discovered it was Hatshepsut's royal sarcophagus. She had given him her royal sarcophagus to be buried in. What is in no doubt is that they were very close. Although it is not known for certain where he was buried, Senenmut had two tombs built for himself. One was in the tombs of the nobles in Luxor, known as TT-71, and the other near Hatshepsut's mortuary temple, known as TT-353. They were both heavily vandalized during the reign of Thutmose III, perhaps during the later king's campaign to eradicate all traces of Hatshepsut's memory. Neither tomb by itself was complete, as would be expected of an Egyptian tomb for a person of high standing. TT-71 is a typical Theban tomb chapel, but does not have burial chambers. TT-353 is fully underground, without any overground chapel. They complement each other and are, only together, a full burial monument. The earliest known star map in Egypt is found as the main part of a decoration in the tomb of Senenmut. This astronomical ceiling in TT-353 is divided into two sections representing the northern and southern skies. Senenmut was most likely an ancient astronomer as well. Hatshepsut had begun construction of a tomb while the royal wife of Thutmose II, but the scale of this was not suitable for a pharaoh. This tomb, located 220 feet up a 350-foot cliff face in a remote valley west of the Valley of the Kings, was discovered by local people in 1916 and investigated by English archaeologist Howard Carter in dangerous circumstances. Carter had first been alerted to the fact that tomb robbers had located a previously undiscovered tomb. He and his workmen made their way to the new tomb during the night, moonlight guiding their way. On reaching the tomb, they discovered a rope leading down the cliff face and could hear the tomb robbers at work. In Howard Carter's own words, "Listening, we could hear the robbers actually at work. So I first severed their rope, thereby cutting off their means of escape, and then, making secure a good stout rope of my own, I lowered myself down the cliff." Shinning down a rope at midnight into a nest full of industrious tomb robbers is a pastime which at least does not lack excitement. There were 8 at work, and when I reached the bottom, there was an awkward moment or two. I gave them the alternative of clearing out by means of my rope, or else of staying where they were without a rope at all, and eventually they saw reason and departed. The rest of the night I spent on the spot, and as soon as it was light enough, climbed down into the tomb again to make a thorough examination. A sarcophagus was found in the tomb made of quartzite, which was reminiscent of the wooden coffins used for the burials of the queens Ahotep and Amos Nefertari. The height of the sarcophagus was an impressive 6 foot 6 inches. The sarcophagus was inscribed for Hatshepsut, "The great princess, great in favor and grace, mistress of all lands, royal daughter and royal sister, great royal wife, lady of the 2 lands, Hatshepsut." The work in the tomb had halted before any decoration had started, and the tomb had never been used. As pharaoh, Hatshepsut had her second tomb, KV-20, dug in the Valley of the Kings by her vizier and high priest of Amun, Hapu-Seneb. This tomb was originally quarried for her father, Thutmose I, and refurbished and taken over by Hatshepsut, who was most likely buried in this tomb upon her death. During the reign of Thutmose III, a new tomb was built for Thutmose I, KV-38, and he was removed. At the same time, Hatshepsut's mummy was most likely moved into the tomb of her nurse, who had been given royal honors and buried in her own tomb in the Valley of the Kings in KV 60. Standing in her original tomb cut for her as a royal wife in 1916, Carter wrote, "As a king, it was clearly necessary for her to have her own tomb in the valley like all other kings. As a matter of fact, I found it there myself in 1903, and the present tomb was abandoned. She would have been better advised to hold to her original plan. In this secret spot, her mummy would have had a reasonable chance of avoiding disturbance. In the valley, it had none. A king she would be, and a king's fate she shared." The precise date for Hatshepsut's death, January 16, 1458 BC, is given on a stele found at Armant, a town located about 12 miles south of Thebes. No contemporary mention of the cause of her death has survived. The medical examination of her mummy indicates that she suffered from diabetes and died from bone cancer, which had spread throughout her body while she was in her 50s. Toward the end of the reign of Thutmose III and into the reign of his son, an attempt was made to remove Hatshepsut from certain historical and pharaonic records. Her cartouches and images were chiseled out of stone walls. Her numerous statues were removed and buried in a pit in front of her temple at Deir el-Bahari. At Karnak, there was even an attempt to wall up her obelisks. While it is clear that much of this rewriting occurred during the close of Thutmose III's reign, it is not clear why it happened, other than the typical self-promotion that existed among the pharaohs. For many years, the modern Egyptologists presumed that the erasures were from Thutmose III acting out of resentment once he became pharaoh, but her accomplishments and images remained featured on all of the public buildings she constructed for 20 years after her death. He does not attempt to erase her images and name from the king lists until he sets up his son as successor. Again, the reasons are unknown, but the most plausible answer is that they did not want to show that Egypt had been ruled by a woman. They wanted the previous status quo to remain. Nothing personal against Hatshepsut's rule, except the fact that a woman had been king. They did not want to establish the precedent for that to happen again, for tradition demanded that kings be male. Their attempts would be in vain, for history would remember her thousands of years later and declare Hatshepsut as one of the most powerful female rulers in world history, greater than even the more famous Cleopatra. In the next episode, we'll feature Thutmose III and the Battle of Megiddo. Thank you for joining us.